appreciate if you can mute all yourself to ensure best sound quality. So second, please follow us on the LinkedIn. Oh, thank you very much. I saw somebody hit that button and there is a reminder on my screen said the recording has started. For whoever started that, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Hi, Lily, it's Adam. I just managed to get that recording to work, so we should be good to go.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So please follow us on the LinkedIn. I will share that linkage in our chat box later. At the end of each presentation, we will have our Q&A session. So you can type your question into the chat at any time, or you can raise your hand and I will call you to unmute and ask your questions. After today's session, you will receive the email instruction of how to get the PDH for yesterday and today's session. So the first presentation is Crosstown Cycle Track by Robin Fish and Jerry Baxter. Robin is a senior project manager in the Mid-Atlantic Traffic Engineering and ITS department for Mid-Hunt. Robin oversees all aspects of traffic engineering for the DC office, including traffic signal operations, traffic signal and ITS design, traffic safety, and multimodal corridor design. Jerry serves as the Washington, D.C. office manager and vice president, working on multimodal projects in Washington, D.C. and Maryland. Jerry's background is in traffic engineering design, including traffic signal and ITS, signing and payment markings, lighting and maintenance of traffic design. Jerry currently serves on the IT board of directors representing the Mid-Colonial District. Now I will turn the time over to Robin and Jerry.
Thank you, Lily. Let the slides load. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. I'm going to talk about the Crosstown Cycle Track, which is a project Mead-Hunt and JMT worked with DDOT to deliver. Little background. So this was part of a broader contract that we have with DDOT. JMT is the contract manager, the prime, and Mead-Hunt is on our team. Through this, we have done a lot of bicycle projects in the district. These are typically kind of quick projects to get bike lanes installed without major reconstruction efforts. So you can see a list here of many of the different projects we've done, and hopefully if you've ridden bikes in the district, you've had the opportunity to ride on them. For this Crosstown Cycle Track, JMT did some survey work and some geotechnical work, but the majority of the work was done by Mead-Hunt. So they will talk about this presentation today. And again, the last thing, just highlight, we do this with the traffic engineering and safety division of DDOT, and they've been great to work with on this. So kind of working along with them to get these projects delivered quickly has been pretty cool. So Robin, please go ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. And yeah, thanks to ITE for having us here today, and thanks to JMT for allowing us to work on this great project. So just a little bit of the history of the Crosstown Cycle Track. If you're not familiar, this is on Irving Street, northeast and northwest, just north of Children's Hospital. And so this area has an interesting history because it's sort of at the heart of the district's plan to expand highways. Well, not the district's plan, but there were plans to expand freeways and highways in the 50s and 60s. And you can see that Irving Street here basically was one of those segments that was built, but you see all this other red. Those are the freeways that weren't built. And so this is kind of like a leftover piece of urban freeway that really doesn't serve anyone any good anymore in its current or in its previous configuration before this project came through. So essentially you have this urban freeway dividing neighborhoods, separating people from services and from other people. And so this project basically seeks to address that by making it more of a multimodal corridor, safer for everyone, and to improve mobility in that area. So to that end, DDOT and I believe RK&K did the 2016 Crosstown Multimodal Study, which basically identified some concepts for how can we put a cycle track on this existing urban freeway, and how can we make that safe and make it work for everyone. And so from that study came a 30% design, and that's where we took over from. And I really just want to talk to you about a few specific areas of interest that kind of gave us a challenge in the design and that I think are kind of interesting here. And so first I want to start, well, sorry, I didn't realize I had a click there, but you can see apparently this was actually part of the plan, bike plan in 1974. And so here we are in 2022. It was built about a year and a half ago. So it takes some time, but things are accelerating nowadays. So the first design challenge that I wanted to talk about is on the west end, which essentially today is the terminus of this cycle track at Warder Street and Kenyon Street. There are plans to eventually extend this further west through to 14th Street and beyond, but today this is where the cycle track ends, and that's where our design ends, and it will tie into the Warder Street cycle track, which will run northbound here. And so the challenge was, because of this somewhat abrupt termination of the cycle track in the original concept, it was running along the north side, which was fine through here. The parking would be restricted and moved to the south side, and the south side parking would become peak restricted parking. However, on the receiving side, it would be the opposite. So the parking on the north would be peak restricted, parking on the south would be full time. So we identified this problem, worked with DDOT, and kind of came to the conclusion that we needed to actually flip the cycle track to the south side so that the cycle track aligned with the full-time parking on the receiving side, and then the peak parking would be removed during the AM on both sides and the PM on both sides. So we would have lane continuity essentially. The other upshot of that, as you can see here, originally the cycle track crossed from the median over to the north side, and moving it to the south side allowed us to shorten this bicycle crossing to just one lane. Now, this is signalized, but the volume of traffic crossing this left turn here is much lower than the through volume. So that reduces the potential for conflicts even with the traffic signal. So here's basically how the design turned out. And you can see again that the cycle track moved to the south side. And so that we restricted a little bit of parking full time to allow the bikes to merge back into the traffic. But then during the peaks, we would have 2 full travel lanes. And again, as I mentioned, now we have a very, very short 2-way cycle track crossing across this new signal. And so the signal really only had to stop traffic crossing here and here, because we added this as a new signalized crosswalk. But the heavy through traffic going westbound here remained free flow. So here's kind of how that turned out. And this is the short crossing signal that I was just pointing out. And then this is where the cycle track runs along the south side once it comes Kenyon Street. So that's the finished product. So the second design challenge that came up was at the intersection of First Street, which is the entrance to the hospital. And we have an extremely heavy left turn in the morning that goes into the hospital. The staff and everything comes in the morning via this route from the north and from the south. And so that keeping that double left was kind of, it had to stay a double left in order for this intersection to work. And what you can see is that on this approach, we have 2 through lanes and a right turn lane. And so basically, in order to keep 2 through lanes in both directions, a double left, add a 2-way cycle track, a buffer, the entire lane had to shift. And the issue was that these drainage structures along this double left turn lane would have to be relocated. And that basically wasn't in the construction budget. As Jerry mentioned, these are kind of quick build projects, not trying to do a lot of civil design or drainage work, because that really pushes the costs up beyond what what this contract can sustain. So we went back and analyzed this and looked at the ways that we could adjust it, and it turned out that we could get away with converting this eastbound approach from 3 lanes, which it was in the previous condition, 2 throughs and a right, to a single through and a shared through right. And that allowed us to push the cycle track to the south of the existing median and not have to touch any of those drainage structures. And essentially, that eliminates any issue we might have with the through traffic shifting and any conflicts that would create with the cycle track. And so you can see we had to do a little bit of median work here to put a signal pole out there. But other than that, we didn't have to touch any of these medians or drainage structures. And so you can see here, this is the intersection. That's the crossing for the bikes, and this is the existing median right there. So the cycle track just sits below that. So the next challenge that came up during the design was on the very east end, the eastern terminus of the cycle track, where the cycle track moves from an on-road facility to a shared use path facility. And originally during the design, this was just going to be a standard asphalt shared use path, but we very quickly realized that that would require us to impact these trees. We didn't want to have to dig down and impact the roots, and we also got similar feedback from DOEE and the Urban Forestry Division. And so what we ended up doing was a porous, permeable, flexible pavement path, which basically sits on top of the existing grade and made it so that we didn't have to impact the tree roots. And as you can kind of see here, it also meanders through the trees, so we didn't have to damage their roots or cut any of the bushes back. This path also ended up, because it was widened, we ended up doing specific path lighting for this trail. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the repaving effort that happened kind of right in the middle of the project. So you can see before we came through, the pavement in most of this corridor was in pretty poor condition. And it turned out that if we did the repaving as part of this specific construction project, it would basically double the budget. And so DDOT worked with its existing repaving contracts and found out that this one was pretty much due on the schedule around the same time frame that the cycle track was going to come through. And so what we ended up doing was developing an interim plan, because they needed to do the repaving a few months before we could actually start installing the cycle track facility. And so the interim signing and marking plan basically made it so that we could maintain the existing vehicle traffic operations, and then very simply come back when we were ready to start building the cycle track and place our blocks right along the third travel lane here, which you can see these white dots and this white line, which was the travel lane during the interim condition, became the concrete cycle track buffer blocks. So here you can see the 3 conditions that I was able to capture in an aerial. The March 2020 aerial is the before repaving, before the project started at all. The second one is a little bit of a mixture of 2 different conditions. It's after the repaving, but before most of the cycle track was in. And so you can see, again, along here that the white line before they put the cycle track markings in would have been the inner lane. So you would have had 3 travel lanes there. But ultimately, all they had to do then is come in and stripe the yellow edge line and put the blocks down, and that allowed them to seamlessly transition from the temporary condition to the ultimate condition. And so that actually made this project possible from a cost perspective by getting the repaving done through their normal channels and coordinating that with our design. And so you can see here a few more examples of how that kind of worked out with that yellow edge line, and then they were just able to again place those blocks right along that yellow edge line and install the flex posts and all that stuff. So hopefully this works. This is kind of some pictures and videos of the facility in action. Yeah, and you can see basically, you know, how people are able to very safely ride along with adjacent vehicles, but you know, there's no conflicts. Each of these signalized intersections has bicycle signals, so all the bike phases are exclusive. No turning conflicts or anything like that. And we noticed also that people, because this area has very narrow sidewalks, people started using it for running and other mobility uses. So lastly, I just wanted to, you know, show some of the feedback that we got, and, you know, everyone that has been involved in this project from the study through to construction should be really proud of it. I think there's been a lot of great feedback, and I think it's really a great model for how to repurpose existing pavement into something that is more appropriate for our current context and our current mobility needs. And so, yeah, congratulations to everyone involved, and thank you again for allowing us to present.
Thank you, Robbie and Jerry. Now it's the Q&A session. So in the chat box, there's one question. Was there any budget for counting the bicycles either at intersections or along the route?
So I can take that. That was not in our scope as part of the design. So the simple answer to that is not for us.
Okay, thank you. Hope that answered your question, answered Doug's question. So who has other questions? Here is one more. Is the cycle track an interim condition or the ultimate condition? And is the shared use path still planned on the north side of Irving?
So this cycle track, to my knowledge, is well, at least a semi-permanent condition. I don't know about the plans for that shared use path. There's another project potentially coming through, a development project that may affect how the shared use path is, how the cycle track is laid out, but I don't know the specifics on the timeline for that shared use path along the north side of Irving.
Okay, thank you. And I think the next two questions are all related to the signal, so I will ask these together. What were the signal modification? Was the angled bicycle signal in your photo intentionally at the angled crossing or just how it was installed?
Yeah, I think that was, I know which one you're referring to. That was an installation mistake, I believe, that needs to be corrected. Where was that? There's one there too. In both pictures, the bicycle's doing something of a wheelie, which is not correct. The bicycle should be flat. So that's just an installation error. So the signal modifications, there were 5. Let me see if I can go back to the So there were 5 traffic signal modifications. So on this eastern end, you have the intersection of Michigan and Irving, which was right here, and this spur was not signalized at all. And so we added sort of a partial signal that ties into the traffic signal at Michigan and Irving to signalize that this crossing right here, and also add a signalized crosswalk. You can see here that there is a future signal, but that was not part of this project. At First Street, the signal modification included the bike signal to cross into the cycle track from the south side, and also the bicycle signals to cross First Street itself from east to west. These double lefts were already protected only, so once the through traffic is running, the bicycle traffic runs simultaneously with no left or right turn conflicts. The third signal modification was over here at the split, which I mentioned earlier, to basically get the bicycles over from Irving Street onto Kenyon Street. So that was a signal that didn't exist at all. So this was an unsignalized crosswalk before this project came through. So it added that crosswalk signalization as well as the bicycle signalization. And then the 2 western intersections both got bicycle signals. The first intersection here has a left turn conflict, and so there are bicycle signals to separate that conflict. And then this intersection, basically the bicycle signals are there to give the bicycles a little bit of a head start so that they can get that merge completed, but there's no turning conflict there.
So when you make those signal modification, you also like doing a synchro analysis to make sure those, especially the left turn vehicles, will not back up blocked through lanes. Okay.
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, do you know if DDOT is conducting follow-up safety studies on this and other protected bike lanes? Would be great to have more data than what is out there currently.
So I don't know about this specific one, but I am aware of another recent bike lane project on 17th Street that was somewhat contentious, and DDOT has been doing something of a before and after analysis. I don't know if they're going to publish the results or if that's just sort of for internal information. But apparently, since they installed the cycle track, there have been no crashes recorded in that facility.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we covered all of our questions. So now let's start our second presentation. I would like to introduce Dave Samba. He is a transportation engineer and community planner with 11 years of professional experience. Dave's double graduate from the University of Virginia and another university. I'm sorry, I think my bio missed some words here. And he currently leads mobility, safety, and parking projects at Kimley Hall. Dave's comprehensive skill set includes traffic operations, multimodal, transportation planning and design, benefit cost analysis, and grant writing, private sector traffic studies, private and public parking evaluations, and complete street evaluations. Dave is passionate about create safe, accessible, and equitable mobility choices for all. Dave will be presenting core of Rosslyn transportation study and the implementation plan. Dave, it's your time now. Dave, you are muted.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to get my presentation going, and I'll share my screen as well. Let's see.
Sure.
Oh. All right, can you confirm you're seeing the presentation?
I think it's coming through. Yeah, I can see it.
Great, perfect. All right, well, good afternoon. Thank you all for the opportunity to present the core Rosslyn transportation study. Lily, thank you for that introduction. So I am David Som. I'm a mobility engineer and community planner at Killing Horn. I'm in our Reston, Virginia office. And I was part of this project, which was really delivered in partnership with Arlington County. So on that point, I would be remiss if I did not name a few members of the county project team who led this initiative through a really excellent planning and public engagement process. So Dan Neighbors, Christine Baker, Kelly Cornell, among many others that were involved. So, high level, what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the county and Roslyn in particular. We're going to give you the planning background for what this study was and what sets it apart. At a high level, I'll run through our analytical process, and then I'm going to spend some time talking about the outcomes of the study and some of the projects that we can expect to see within Roslyn in the next 10 years. Also touch on some of the strategic efforts of the county to increment into those projects through tactile urbanism. All right, that's an introduction. All right, so Arlington County, just for the folks on the call, if anyone's unfamiliar, urban county, about 26 square miles, population, about 235,000 residents, and bordered by Washington, D.C., Maryland, neighboring jurisdictions of Virginia. There are about, within Arlington County, about 160,000 plus workers commute daily into the county. So certainly congestion and accessibility and from both surface transit and surface transportation and rail transportation is important. Certainly there are a number of multimodal options to get to the county. Metro Rail, 11 Metro Rail stations, local bus service, 17 ARC bus routes, I believe. Capital Bike Share, Zipcar, Rail, VRE, many options. And of course, what we always want to make sure we pay attention to is those active transportation modes that are at most risk. So that's the bicycle and pedestrians. So how do we manage all these interactions? I think that was a major part of this study. Some other, just context on Arlington County, the county has 5,700 on-street parking spaces and over 100,000 off-street parking spaces, and the majority of those are privately managed or maintained. So drilling down to Roslyn, then and now, so I'll show you a little bit of some imagery of Roslyn past as we get to Roslyn present. So Roslyn is, today, it's a home to a dynamic and interconnected urban transportation system. It offers those who live and work and play in the neighborhoods really a wide range of choices for how they travel and where they can go and through a diverse range of transportation modes. It is, this older image may not lead you to think it is a walkable neighborhood and actually has the highest foot traffic volumes in all of Arlington County. So as we continue to move through, this is an image from the 1960s. Development is starting to happen, obviously. Still from 1960s, but we have a little better color cameras, and then we see Roslyn today. So about 13,000 population, more than 25,000 people work in Roslyn, depending on the statistics you look at. And just to provide some context to what I just said, there are 664 metered parking spaces, so about 12% of the county's parking spaces are in Roslyn, and about 20,000 off-street spaces. So again, 20% of the off-street spaces. So Roslyn is interesting. It has some interesting and prominent transportation features. This is the Fort Myer Drive tunnel that's currently there. You can see a sky bridge, I believe, in the background there. And it is on the nexus of a future transportation change as we are grappling with and come to terms with that people are changing the way they want to travel, right? It's more about that human scale, pedestrian scale experience as opposed to this auto-centric experience that Roslyn was built to satisfy. So how do we incorporate that into our study? All right, so talk a little bit. Oh, I'll just give you a little more context. I really like these images just to give you context for how active Roslyn is as looking through parking meter performance. So this is 10 a.m., 12 p.m., so lunchtime. So red means there's more activity, more parking activity at 7 p.m. So Roslyn it's pretty busy. And so people are there to enjoy themselves, to work, to live. And so planning this community is important, and planning it well and make sure it's functional for all those uses is critical. That's a population statistic. So you can see that how Roslyn is projected to grow, both from population and employment. And how this all leads to, of course, the Roslyn sector plan. So how do we start to envision what tomorrow will be? In 2015, I'll skip slides. In 2015, the county developed or approved the Roslyn Sector Plan, which through a process called Realize Roslyn. And it was an update to a 1992 plan. It served as a 25-year outlook to guide the future public and private investment and provide recommendations for parks and transportation needs and transportation-related elements. In that sector plan, they identified that what Roslyn needed was a better urban design framework to become more attractive and a functional place. They also wanted a refined multimodal transportation system, and they wanted a more cohesive and functional park and open space network. And you'll see what I'm talking about parks and open space in a second. So the Realize Roslyn and the Roslyn Sector Plan was a very successful effort, but ultimately it was not a regulatory document. It presented an illustrative concept. It recommended some goals. It set a vision, and it established guidelines and policies. But how do you get from a vision to projects and implementation? Well, you actually need to do another study, and that's what the Core of Roslyn study was. So it was ultimately the Core of Roslyn Transportation and Implementation Study ultimately was an opportunity to take the great ideas of the sector plan and analyze them, design them in the public realm, share them with the public, have that idea exchange, that process of discovery to lead to real projects that could be implemented in Roslyn and that were vetted within the public and that spoke to the current needs of today. So I kind of already hit on the goals of the project, but maybe I'll just say a couple other high-level things. So again, we were trying to evaluate multimodal design concepts. We were trying to measure how each concept achieved the sector plan's goals. We definitely were heavily interested in engaging the public and other stakeholders. And ultimately, we were trying to adopt a 2030 preferred alternative that composed of individual projects that can move through the county's design process and also their CIP processes. And then we also were really interested in sequencing those projects. So how do we create a fluid network transition from where we were when we started the project, I guess in 2018, 2019, to where we want to be in 2030? And then also a little bit of visioning is always important. We wanted to identify projects that went beyond 2030 to continue to realize the Roslyn Sector Plan. All right, so just give you a little timeline graphic. Again, sector plan adopted in 2015. The county started to do some short-term activities, engagement with the community in 2017, some tactical urbanism projects, and I'll highlight that and come back to that in a second. And then we kicked off in earnest the Realize Roslyn study in 2017 to do all our analysis, to engage the public, and then to really think through what implementation will be. And I highlight tactical urbanism because I think this was a really important aspect of this, important and related aspect of our study, which was even though as we were analyzing all these different future alternatives for 10 years out, for 15 years out, the county recognized that it was important to speak to what people needed in Roslyn today. So through tactical urbanism deployments, I'm talking about a little bit lane restriping, planters in the roadway, rethinking parking and curb space, and making it a little more pedestrian accessible and pedestrian friendly. The county was able to do some relatively low cost and quick implementation projects to, one, set the stage for some of these future changes, but then two, specifically to address needed operational and safety needs. And I'm a very graphic person, so here's just another timeline of that. The only thing I'll point out on this slide is that we had 4 different and very successful public engagement meetings, and really that helped to refine the process. So what did we focus on in the Core of Roslyn study? The first thing is that it was centered around implementation. Everything that we did was to get the county a list of projects that could be designed, implemented by around 2030. So we really tried to keep a very realistic eye on that, of that end goal. And we looked at, it was a multimodal study. We looked at how every single mode was influenced or impacted by the different design alternatives. We always wanted to make sure it aligned with the sector plan goals, but we also tried to stretch those things in the sense of what else can we be doing to increase the accessibility of bus and rail transit? How can we change and enhance the pedestrian experience and comfort? What can we do, what can we suggest that would increase the connectivity of Roslyn's bicycle facilities to the county's larger network? These were some of the things that we were thinking of. And even though I'm a transportation engineer and planner, we're also trying to think beyond just transportation we were thinking about urban design. How is what we're doing or what we're suggesting going to incorporate elements of sustainability, green space, pervious areas? How's it going to enhance the streetscape and placemaking elements of Roslyn as a neighborhood? These were just broader things that were embedded in our analysis. So again, here's some of our goals and objectives. Again, we tried to take a very multimodal focus, wanted to understand how we're affecting all the ways people are currently traveling and they might travel in the future if we could raise that level of service for them. So that's the background context. A little bit more about Roslyn to kind of show what we're working with. Again, if you know where Roslyn's situated, some common destinations from Roslyn, you're heading into DC or heading out west to Greater Fairfax, Tyson's Corner area. You're certainly using the Roslyn-Ballston corridor along I-66. Roslyn's mode share, I look at this, this is very interesting to me because you'll see that transit percent is about 40, or public transportation is about 47% for Roslyn's residents. So it's essentially double that of the entire county. So there's a great opportunity there. These are residents that are already used to using transit and used to active transportation. So raising that level of access and that level of amenities there would only further increase their use, right? And so there's a great opportunity. Sometimes you'll meet a community and they might be resistant to changes that might lower the vehicular level of service to increase the pedestrian or the transit comfort. But this was a community that was very receptive to that as we were working through the process. So again, this is just another way of looking at that. These are Roslyn, I guess they're the employees that are the mode share and the commute trip, right? And again, you see that transit use for their commutes is just as or nearly as equivalent to the drive alone use. So that's both a call and an opportunity. It's a call to provide those better amenities and service and frequency so that the experience of that trip is something that people are going to tell their friends about, tell their community about, and enhance that percent even higher than 40%. It's also an opportunity because, so as I mentioned, this is a community that's already immersed in active transportation. Again, Roslyn, it's a regional gateway. We do see a lot, 80% of through trips heading through Roslyn. So that's something you have to grapple with. How do we address that? It's a commuter route going through Roslyn on 29 or 66. How do we address that while still focusing on the study area? And then I kind of already alluded to this earlier, just Roslyn is poised for some significant development. And so this was a very critical point to take a step back and recognize we need to implement that vision now, sooner rather than later, so that we are prepared and ready to absorb the future population, the future employment, and really make Roslyn a place that is active and vibrant. All right, so again, a little more background for you. So now we can talk about the data and methodology, the nerdy stuff, I suppose. So what was our key data? How do we do this study? I mean, it's everything you would think it would be. The existing traffic counts. We used some streetlight big data to really understand regional trips and trends. We took some previous parking data that we'd had from that meter parking study and other studies to develop a really good existing conditions understanding. In terms of some other things we did, of course, field observation, travel time runs, and then we used our typical modeling processes, the MWCOG regional model, a sub-area model, and a VISM model, which I'll get into in a little bit. So just to give you a sense of what our study area was, quite large. So we had in that blue level, that's the entire travel demand network that we studied. But then we kind of broke it to smaller and smaller chunks that were more bite-sized and were able to really accommodate. So again, just to give you a sense of that, again, we had a macroscopic analysis. So that's what we use the MWCOG model for. We really want to understand at a regional level, how are trips occurring? What's the external trips into Roslyn, the internal trips out of Roslyn, and of course the internal to internal trips as well. So that helped us really kind of grapple with, okay, how does Roslyn relate to the region? From there, we took a step further and said, okay, well, now that we know how Roslyn relates to the region, and of course, when we're using the regional model, it's not as refined, it's not as detailed to the study area. So we use the VISM model to replicate kind of sub-area travel patterns. And I'll show a figure in a second that shows that a little more clearly. And then once we were able to really replicate that sub-area trips, we drilled down one further level into a microscopic evaluation using a VISM model, that's where we're going to do our detailed study area network analysis. And that's actually where we're able to have a little better understanding of how some of the changes we're recommending are going to impact from a multimodal perspective are impacting vehicles and vice versa. So again, just to give you a sense again of our study area and our forecasting. Actually, I'll go to the next slide on this one. So the purple levels are the MWCOG traffic analysis zones. The pink lines are the sub-area splits that we use for our BSUM. So again, we tried to really drill down there. So we were able to get a little bit better granularity as we were developing our modeling network. All right, so did all this, we set up all this process. What was the analysis? Well, again, it's typical analysis you would think. We looked at existing traffic conditions. We mapped traffic volumes during the peak hour. We looked at level of service and delay and congestion and queuing. And really, we were trying to understand what the existing conditions were, where congestion exists, and how it propagates through the network, and where the kind of relief valves might be. We looked a little bit into the future to understand, again, using the MWCOG regional forecast and some specific land use inputs that the county provided. We wanted to understand how is trip making going to be different in the future? If we're planning for projects in 2030, how responsive those projects be to this 1% per year growth in auto trips and that 4% per year growth in non-auto trips? Ultimately, through all that analysis, through that work, that led us to a preferred alternative for what Rosslyn, the streets of Rosslyn, could be. So again, this is taking the vision of Realize Rosslyn, the vision of the sector plan, and turning it into 14 tangible projects. I'm going to hit on a couple highlights of those. So I showed you that the picture of the Fort Myer Drive tunnel. One of the projects is to remove that tunnel and actually two-way Fort Myer Drive. That'll certainly add a little bit more connectivity and use of the grid. We added protected bike lanes, or suggested that protected bike lanes could be added on Lynn, Wilson, and Fort Myer Drive, among other streets. So there's a new signalized mid-block crossing on Fort Myer Drive, which is an opportunity because now that tunnel is gone, it's another opportunity to cross. It's still a wide network to cross, but it's now an opportunity. And then throughout the network, looking at where pedestrian circulation and flows were occurring, we identified 18 new or improved pedestrian crosswalks, whether those were with median refuges or just tightening up the intersection cross-section. All right, here's another image of the preferred alternative, just rotated for you and zoomed in a little bit so you can see some of the green bike lanes, protected bike lanes in there as well. Not just to only focus on vehicles, I wanted to just drill down on bicycles for a second here. And just looking at the baseline compared to the preferred alternative in terms of what we were recommending, you can't really tell from the numbers, but if you look at the increase in the amount of green shown on the right, we were able to suggest or show that there'd be a value in increasing the percentage of bicycle level traffic stress 1 streets from currently where it is about 12% all the way up to 61%. So think about that. That is an increase of, I think it was 1.7 miles of improved connections in Rosslyn for people that are biking, and to an extent, people that are walking too. How did we kind of make our case? This is a big table, and I'm not going to read all of it, I should say. But one of the things that was really important for us was coming up with a comparative assessment, right? So we're very good in our industry about talking about vehicles. We're very good about talking about delay and congestion and level of service. And we're also okay about talking about level of traffic stress or pedestrian level of comfort in isolation. But where we can use some more help is talking about all these things together and helping the public understands trade-offs and benefits to one mode or balance. And so we came up with this comparative assessment where we identified measures of effectiveness per mode that were specific to that mode, and use that as a benchmark of, well, how well is this mode doing in the preferred alternative? Are we making a positive change, or making a negative change, or are we keeping it approximately the same? And that allowed us to have a little bit more of a nuanced conversation with the community so they could see the value of some of the changes that we might recommend. All right, so key takeaways, implementation, next steps. So this process was performance-based planning, right? We iterated multiple times on design concepts to come up with a balanced street network. And as I mentioned, that comparative assessment led to a really good conversation with the community and a screening of those concepts to make sure that we were hitting not just one vision of Realize Roslyn, but all the visions of Realize Roslyn. And then we also took a very nuanced approach to looking at how the changes we're making affected both the region by using the MWCOG model, but also the very specific local needs using the Bassoon model and also connecting with stakeholders. On implementation, as I mentioned, we hit 14 projects. One of the things that was very important was phasing and responsibility. So we thought through, like, again, as I mentioned, we want to have a fluid transition into 2030. So how do we accommodate all these different projects at the same time? How do we help the county identify what the funding mechanism will be? So we prepared an opinion on probable costs and a sequencing of each of these. So, and we thought through it in terms of, well, what do you do before you fill in Fort Myers Drive? So if there's a certain amount of project you could do then. What do you do after you fill in Fort Myers Drive? A certain amount of project you can do there. And then that gets you to 2030. What else can the county do after 2030? And recognizing that the Roslyn bid was a key stakeholder, what are things that might be developer-led? And they may not have a certain timeline, but they're no less important. So what are developer-led initiatives that are really going to enhance the Roslyn grid network? And now, with my last couple minutes here, I'm just going to drill down a couple of the implementation projects. So again, Fort Myers Drive, the tunnel conversion is a critical one, and we talked a little bit about that. Bringing this tunnel to grade and making sure that this is now a new pedestrian path across Fort Myers Drive. And just to show you, again, we also went through a very detailed sequencing process of, well, what does it look like? How do you actually do it? How would it work in actuality? What is the timeline to bring this road to grade? The rough sequencing that we provided for the county. And then this is essentially what the new cross section would look like. Again, still a wide road, but now it's a little more pedestrian accessible. I bring up this project, Dark Star Park expansion. So you can see there's an existing slip lane that we're recommending to close to really enhance the amount of space that's provided to the park. And because there was a frequency of some crashes there that we thought we could eliminate by kind of removing this legacy slip lane that wasn't really necessary from an operational perspective. This was actually the first project that was funded out of the Realize Roslyn, or out of the Core Roslyn Transportation Study. So I will bring that up as well. So what's next? So the Core Roslyn Transportation Study, and I got this quote earlier today from the project manager. It's seen as plan standard in Arlington County. It was an effort led by a multidisciplinary team of engineers, planners, and landscape architects, and it used a combination of modeling tools, both high level and microscopic, to really analyze and interpret what a future street network could look like, a future multimodal network could look like. It also provided a very real and tangible sequence of events, opinion of probable cost, and really the tools that the county needed to go out and get these projects put into the CIP, and also to win $12 million in NBTA, or be awarded $12 million in NBTA funding. So when I think about what's next, it's a continuation of that. It is seeking more funding from our local and regional partners to advance the rest of these projects. It is programming the rest of the projects into the CIP, and it's also taking advantage of some of the new things that are coming up from the Jobs and Infrastructure Act. We know that that act is supporting 25 competitive grant funding opportunities. I can think of one in particular that would make a lot of sense for Roslyn, which is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. That's really it's $5 billion targeted exclusively for local governments to support Vision Zero, complete streets, things that are going to reduce crashes and fatalities and enhance the comfort for cyclists and pedestrians. So if you think again about the effort we did to design these projects for Roslyn, a program like that makes the most sense for that. So I'm going to leave it there and say that this was a really great study in an important community. And one of the things that's really useful, or that I look back on this, is we spent a lot of time planning. And this was a study that was focused on how do we get to implementation? How do we get to real projects? And I think that's something we should not lose sight of as we continue our work. All right, and I'll leave it for questions.
Thank you very much, Dave. So that's a really good explanation of the whole study and the plan. We got some questions here. The first one is, what is the percentage of connected smart tools in the study, especially in urban areas?
I don't think I have the answer to that. Connected smart tools, is that what I heard?
Yeah, connected smart tools. So maybe the question is referring to the CAV equipment.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that answer. I do know that's an initiative that is important to the county. Obviously, as we get in more urban areas, things like that, ITS and deployments like that make more sense. So I would not be shocked if that was a future project that could be involved within the changes that are happening in Roslyn.
Thank you. Another question is, the first project funded was mentioned. When will construction be completed?
Right. So the first project, that Dark Star Park project, I believe the design is at 15%, or at least the last time I checked in on the project. However, so this is another good example of tactical urbanism. So they already closed the slip lane just with paint and planters. And it was funded, that was like the phase 1 efforts. Phase 2 design, I believe, is underway, and that's really, closing it permanently and extending the park. So I would suspect that project is ongoing, and the timeline should that be, subject to funding.
Thank you. Another question is, the Dark Star slip ramp was closed with plants and flag posts. Was that implemented based on this study?
Yeah. So again, as I mentioned, that question hit right on what I was saying. So as we were working, we identified or helped the county identify and prove that there's no operational challenge to closing that slip lane. So the county was making a concurrent effort to do these tactical urbanism efforts. So again, that's kind of how we could close it temporarily or with the planters and with the painting, even as we're doing the analysis. And now the county is moving into the more permanent closure of that.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, since the study was started done before 2020, how has the pandemic affected the plan or impact analysis and the data, especially with the new way of work?
So that's an interesting question. I think if you think through the way we looked at it in our analysis, certainly we estimated a certain amount of vehicles using the regional model, using our Urban model, but that focus was more based on being able to understand how a multimodal change would affect the delay. And through our analysis, while of course we didn't want to create like level service F and high delay everywhere, I would say in elevating the priorities of different modes, pedestrians and bicycles and transit was elevated much higher than vehicle use, quite frankly, because we were trying to bring things back in balance. So if we're thinking about the pandemic and ongoing impacts to transportation and transportation use, think about the modes that people kind of feel are still using, and think about the work from home for certain environments, and being able to be out in the middle of the day a little bit more because you're not constrained to an office. How are you doing that? Probably walking, biking, transit. Oh, well, transit has had some ups and downs with that. So I would mention that yes, there's an element of we can take another look at the analyses, and we can take a look at how travel patterns have changed or could change. But again, as I mentioned in Roslyn, there's already a 40% transit use, right? There's already this active transportation immersion that's occurring. So I wouldn't expect that the vision and then the implementation projects that we identified would not still fit. And anything, I think that there's an acceleration because there are some projects that could get elevated in priority to meet the changing needs.
Yeah, thank you for that information. So I think we covered all of our questions. So thank you, Dave, and also thank you for Jerry and Robin for your presentations. This concludes our 2-day Lunch and Learn virtual technical sessions. Thank you for all your attending. I hope you have learned and enjoyed these presentations. Once WCC site clean the video recording tape, we will share that information. And I know from yesterday's session, there are a couple of questions left unanswered. I will coordinate with yesterday's presenter to answer those questions and distribute to our attendees. So have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.